I watched one of your shorts, I believe, where you were talking about how China is actually a democracy, which you touched on a little bit ago. And the thing that went through my head, and I might just be conditioned to this, was, oh, sure, they have voting, but if anybody votes differently, they'll be killed. Like, that's what I've been taught, and I haven't questioned it because I don't think about. I just haven't. I haven't delved into that. What makes that? Why do I think that, and why is that wrong?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the reason why you think that is, and it's very understandable for somebody like if you grew up in America to think that because that is how the United States paints China. Like we paint China as though that they're like, super suppressing of dissent and things like that. And but we need to understand the reasoning for that. One of the reasons why American capitalists think that China has such extreme restrictions on freedom of speech is because American capitalists literally believe that money is speech. They literally went to the Supreme Court to prove that. China has public financing of their campaigns and they do not allow any campaign spending, right? They don't allow any campaign spending. It's all government funded. No private funding is allowed. And if they find that you have privately funded campaigning, they will nullify the election. They will nullify the election and odds are you're going to face corruption charges. So like if you're an American capitalist and you want to influence the politics of China, you are going to find yourself having a very, very difficult time. But when you look at the actual process, it's really, really interesting. And to be fair, it looks a little bit sterile compared to the way we do politics here. But from their perspective, they might consider political campaigning in the United States to be vulgar. Because really, when it comes to campaigning in China, you're supposed to put up your resume and basically write a cover letter, right? That's basically it. And it's not even about promises, right? It's not about campaign promises. It's about here is my thought process about why I think I would make a good representative. And then here's my background and things that I have done sort of in my personal life that I think make myself a good candidate. That is really how campaigning is done. All of that information then is sent to the voters for the voters to look at the different candidates and then decide who they want. And China actually uses an approval voting system. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's kind of similar to ranked choice voting, but you basically mark off every candidate that you approve of so that the candidate with the highest approval rating is the one that wins. So it looks really sterile. It looks very much like it's not political campaigns, but not every country does political campaigning like we do. And I think we have to admit that the way that we do campaigning incentivizes this sort of like, honestly, cringe, right? Like, let's be real, right? It incentivizes cringe because the easiest way to get clout and attention is to be incredibly cringe and have people attack you on Twitter and retweet you and say, wow, look at this inflammatory thing that this person said. Whereas the Chinese political system really incentivizes a sort of professionalism and a sort of reservedness in terms of like your job is to basically be a bureaucrat for the people to make sure that their needs get met. Um, and it's just a fundamentally different approach to politics because, and this is where it gets really wild, it only takes 50 people to initiate a recall election from a local people's Congress in China. 50 people is not that many people at all. And so these are people whose positions is very dependent on keeping as many people happy as possible and not necessarily to make immediate short-term radical changes, but to gradually improve things over time. And so when we look at it from the United States, we see it as, well, they're not arguing with each other. They're not screaming at each other on Twitter. They're not, they're not doing these campaign ads and things like that. But it's just a different way of going about democracy. And we can have conversations about whether or not everybody thinks that that's like a good system or a bad system. But ultimately, like a lot of Americans have a tendency to call that not democracy, but I feel like it's hard to say that that's not democracy. It just has a very different approach. It's just a completely different approach. And I also want to dispel one myth. A lot of people think China's a one-party state. At the National People's Congress, there are 8 political parties that are represented, and there are I think somewhere around 100 representatives who are unaffiliated from any political party. And there's no requirement to be a member of the Communist Party to run for office. You just need 12 signatures. Uh, in order to run for office, you need 12 signatures of people who say, yeah, I would like to vote for this person, basically. Um, and so it's just a really tame system that is meant to intentionally avoid the inflammatory nature of political campaigns that happen elsewhere. And the reason why the United States, once again, to wrap around to answer your question more directly, the reason why the United States claims that that is, preventing any type of political dissent, um, really just rests on the fact that the United States has a long history of using money to influence elections around the world. And the fact that we can't do that in China makes billionaires really mad.